My name is Father Vasquez. I am pastor of St. John the Baptist Catholic Church in Corpus Christi.
What was Josemaria Escriva like as a child?
As a child? Well, he grew up in a very devout family. He was kind of quiet. Well, he was a normal kind of kid, though. But it was growing up with a father, especially that was very devout, was important to him, and I think that had the most impact on his life as a little boy into his teenage years.
That kind of leads into my next question. Did he have any role models?
Yeah, I think his father had probably the biggest impact in his life. He was a good dad. He was a strong father, but a very loving one. And again, his devout practice, a lot like John Paul II's father, had impact or influence in his life, teaching him to pray, teaching him his faith. So that was very important, perhaps the most important role model that Josemaria had in his life. Mm-hmm.
Was there any inspiration from his dad to become a priest?
No, I don't think so. I think his father was perhaps not even thinking about that. Josemaria describes that his father had great plans for him, hoping that he would do something big. And I think there was, if I'm not mistaken, I think he had already discussed certain plans in his life. I think it was an architect or an engineer, something like that. But he came and he revealed this to his father, not knowing what his father would or how his father would react to it. But his father was very moved by his revelation of his vocation story to him, and accepted it. Accept whatever his son was going to do. So he was very open to that. But it wasn't something his father pushed, or something that came from. I don't think it came from his dad.
And speaking of him becoming a priest, is there any elaboration on the footprints in the snow story?
It's an interesting story, isn't it? What I think is probably the most interesting part of that story is that it's such a subtle way. It's not, anybody wouldn't have noticed it. Probably told that story 1,000 times, and people might have thought, well, what's the big deal? That's not such a big deal. It's, how did you see such a definitive event in this, friar that he followed and saw as he was going to the church? But for him, it was such a big impact, and it's very much like God. God's revelation to us, when God wants something from us, it's hard to explain because others don't understand it. It's hard for us to share with others because people will think, well, that's not much. But there's something that enlightens us to see God's greater plan. And I think God's gift to Josemaria was not just what he saw, but what he was able to make of what he saw. And enabled him to say, look at what is happening. I could do more. I could sacrifice more. And so he interpreted that as, I can give up my life in the service of the Lord this way. So while it's a nice story, it's a simple story, it's a greater impact is what you see in there.
What was it like for him to be a priest during the time of war and totalitarian rule?
It's a horrible time, actually. The Spanish Civil War was like a battle between four different groups, really. You had the fascists and the socialists, and then pure atheists, all of which were enemies of the church. Then you had the conservatives, who were the only ones where there was solace in the church. That time period was very difficult for the Spaniards. It was right before the Second World War. Many, many, many martyrs at the time. In fact, we are still finding out about them, and some are still being canonized in the church today. Being a priest at the time was a lot like what it was like in Mexico at the time. The priests were persecuted. They were killed on sight in many regions of Spain. So he had to leave certain regions that were controlled by these nationalist groups, these fascists or communists, even the atheists, and move into places under control of the conservatives. I think he goes into the region near Barcelona, going through the mountains of France, the Pyrenees, going through France and then entering there, which was really dangerous. But it was there where he was able to continue his work, his studies, And then after the Franco regime won the war, the church was a little more at peace, and he was able to continue his work in Madrid. But it was a difficult time.
What is Opus Dei, and what inspired him to kind of make that organization?
This is something remarkable about Josemaria Escriva, because Opus Dei is, even to this day, a rather unique institution. The concept that he had in his mind, that the laity, that the people of God can discover holiness, that they could become saints in whatever they do. They didn't have to leave their workforce. They didn't have to leave their workplace. They didn't have to leave their families in order to find holiness. That concept, that idea, was so foreign to the church. In the mind of the church at the time, you're talking about Europe in the beginning of the 20th century, there was still the thought that if you wanted to be a saint, you had to be a priest, or you had to be a nun. If you want to be a saint, those are the only place you could find them. Josemaria Escriva didn't believe that. He believed that God was in the ordinary, everyday life, and that people doing their job, whether you were an engineer, you were a doctor, you were a teacher, you're an architect, you're a housewife, whatever decision, whatever kind of life you lead, you can become holy. And really, Opus Dei is a small part of the church. It's not the whole church, and it's not the end-all of the church, but it is an organization of lay people in which they are guided by priests of Opus Dei to learn to live that kind of lifestyle. So they're kind of all over the world. In fact, they are all over the world. And it helps them to realize that whatever life, whatever vocation you choose, you can become a saint doing that. That's really the great mission of Opus Dei.
What do people who are members of Opus Dei do throughout the world to help?
The biggest thing is their witness, the way they live their life. The first thing they have to learn is, how do I live my life in accord with being a disciple of Jesus Christ, of being a saint? How can I do that every day? In the way I am a father or a mother, a husband or a wife, in my job at work. Then, by doing that, they model sanctity to the world, and they have a great impact on people around them. It's not a propaganda or a recruitment type of thing. It is really more living your life. That's really the apostolate. Living your life, seeking holiness every day, and then influencing the people around you, like your family, like your friends, your coworkers, your neighbors. That's really the most effective way of evangelizing. And Opus Dei has really tapped into something that I think is very important in the church.
What put Josemaria on the path to sainthood?
To sainthood? Well, I think it's the legacy. And this is a question you're going to ask me, I know, I'm sorry, but it's his legacy. In other words, this idea that he introduces of finding holiness in the ordinary way of life is something the church then takes on later from him. Because at the time they thought he was this crazy liberal priest and didn't know what he was doing. He was more Protestant than Catholic. Today they think he's not even Catholic, he's just like way out in the mainstream. But what he presented, the church took up at the Second Vatican Council. It's the concept, we have it in the Catechism, and we teach it from the Council, the universal call to holiness. All of us are called to be saints. And I think that was a big impact on John Paul II, for instance. Because if you consider the saints that he made, including Josemaria, a lot of the saints are ordinary, everyday people, couples. We have a couple being canonized soon, the parents of Therese. But you see, in his case, like St. Gianna Beretta Molla, a doctor, a woman doctor. You have Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati, who's this young guy, kind of an athlete in the world type of thing. There's a lot of that. And you see John Paul II highlighting those. So when the cause for Josemaria Escriva's canonization comes up, I think it was a no-brainer. I think it was easy for the church to do that because of what impact he had in the life of the church and how he personally impacted so many of those who knew him. And that's, I think, how the cause, really stirred up or began for him.
Did Josemaria personally mentor any other priests or lay people?
As far as I know, priests for sure. Those who succeeded after him. One of them, whose cause also for canonization is one of the one who took over after he died in '75 was Blessed Alvaro de Portillo, I believe is his name. He was a bishop. He was kind of his protege, and then also a younger priest who's now the prelate of Opus Dei, Bishop Javier Echevarria. So in both of those, mentor in the sense that they were around him. They were influenced highly by him. They learned from him all the time, and they saw what kind of priest he was, and that became priests like him. And to this day, you hear them talk, and they almost sound like they are identical to the way he spoke and how he related to people, because they're learning from him. So I think those two. There are probably many lay people that were also influenced by him, but those two I think are the biggest. The ones that had the biggest impact, or he had the biggest impact in their life.
Who was Josemaria canonized by, and what can you tell us about the miracles that took place in order for him to be canonized?
Well, his canonization was done by John Paul II. This is the one you had to ask me, right? I believe it was a sister who was sick with some lung disease, I think, but I could be mistaken, which was the actual miracle that opened the pathway for his canonization. But John Paul II was the one who made him a saint. Controversially, though, many people thought he should never have been a saint. But that has a lot more to do with politics than it does with reality.
What effect has Josemaria had on your life?
A lot, actually. More than reading about his life, I've read a lot of his works. There are 3 basic works that he's written, plus some of his homilies that are available. And I think the biggest impact he has had, or what has influenced me the most, is his tenacity, his strength, his courage. Even in the most difficult times, he was very courageous. And he became a pillar of strength for those around him. He was fearless in that regard. But also his common sense spirituality, I think. He wasn't one up in the clouds, kind of, with all strange type of, or new type of ways of thinking. He was very much down to earth. You read a lot of his stuff. Perhaps my favorite is when he was asked about the Mass. Someone asked him why Mass is so long. And his response was simple. He said, well, it's because your love is too short. It's kind of that bluntness in him that I really like in him, because it's really honest. It's truthful. It's how he thinks. But he was a very humble man, a very personal man, and one that had a charming personality. People loved him. People loved to be around him. They enjoyed his company. He wasn't someone that made people nervous. He was someone that people liked to spend time with.